Sir,
That's where we
looks like
need
it's
to
10
look, because
o'clock.
that would blow up my.
I got a bail. We've already seen this, right?
Yeah.
The planning board. Westborough TV, are you ready? Give me a thumbs up if you, okay, great. We're going to start.
Great. And Joe, I don't see Joe.
Good morning. Welcome. This is a joint meeting of the Westborough Planning Board with the Select Board. This is a hybrid meeting, so I have to read the governor's order into the record. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be at the Great Hall in the Forbes building located at 45 West Main, and it is possible that some or all of the members of the public body may attend remotely, with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by in-person attendance. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time via Verizon Channel 28 and Charter Channel 192 or via Westborough TV's online platforms at westboroughTV.org and youtube.com/WestboroughTV. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark Silverberg. I'm chair of the planning board. We are having a presentation today on the Otis Street corridor study, which the planning board has already seen. We actually commissioned the study. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jim Robbins. Unfortunately, I cannot stay, but thank you all for coming.
Good morning. I'm Jim Robbins, a town planner here in Westborough. I'm glad Mark introduced himself because I was getting worried. He was about ready to finish and people might be thinking, who's that? That's the chairman of the planning board. Thank you, Mark, for coming, taking the time from your day. I'm glad to see so many people here today. That's really a tribute to how hard the staff has worked to put this together and keep people in the loop on the process. This is actually our second stakeholder meeting. Some of you may have been at the meeting that we had back in May of last year, May of 21, which was a success. And today we're going to present to you the final plan that we have and get your input before we go any further. So as Mark said, I'm Jim Robbins, town planner here in Westborough. You can see the people that are going to be talking this morning or presenting. Fred Leonardo is also here, our community development director. I want to thank the members of the select board that are here. I see our town manager and assistant town manager are both in the audience today. Thank you, Christy and Kim, for coming. Also, the project team. To my right, Bob Michaud, who's the managing principal at MDM Transportation Consultants, and Dan Dumas over here on the left-hand side of the building, or rather in the room, here at the senior project manager, and our counsel, Bob Buckley from Reimer and Bernstein, counsel on the project. Not my mouse. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Having a little bit of difficulty with the mouse here. Go ahead, Bob, I'm gonna just give that to you.
I'll be the mouse here.
It's not my mouse.
And, yeah.
Can you go back a slide?
Yep.
Or you did?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to be, this is going to be a joint presentation here. You can see who's going to be presenting in our previous slide. We're going to break this into a couple different sections. I'm just going to introduce the study, and then Bob is going to take it over from there and talk about the study's recommendations. You'll see a bunch of slides that show the actual corridor, the streets, the improvements recommended, the widths of easements, and the construction work proposed within the easements. Then we'll talk a little bit about how we'll be able to fund this project. Next slide. So the background of the project, as I said earlier, we began in 2019 as part of the Otis Street, 50 Otis Street site plan review. You all know that as the Amazon robotics site, the former site of our pharmaceutical company that we had in town, Astra Pharmaceutical. Now we're proud to have Astra gone and Amazon Robotics here. The study is funded by Atlantic Management, and I see Joe Zink in the audience here today from Atlantic. Thank you for being here, Joe. In January of 21, we conducted a road safety audit together with Mass DOT. That was our first public event. DOT participated, MDM conducted the study. We had staff actually on the site during the remote meeting so that we could get pictures of what was going on at the intersection live. We did a review of existing conditions and recommendations for future improvements. In September of 21, we had a draft of the final quarter study, which was reviewed by both the Select Board and the Planning Board. It included recommendations for roadway improvements, including widening and signalization, as well as pedestrian safety improvements for walking and biking. And I mentioned earlier, in May of 21, we had our first stakeholder meeting, so there was a step between the initial road safety audit and the final study. So where are we going forward? We're here today for our stakeholder meeting to review the quarter recommendations. We've also submitted an expression of interest for a MassWorks grant, and we're going to be looking for funding for that. In June of 22, we'll have a full application to MassWorks, and the grant awards are generally made in the fall, announcements in October, with awards in November. I think that's a general timeline. I have April Anderson here, our consultant that's going to be working and submitting the MassWorks grant application. Our next slide shows the process that we went through. The scoping study beginning in 2019 and 20, where we surveyed baseline conditions for traffic and pedestrian and bicycle movement, as well as public transportation. We all know that we have an MBTA station, a commuter rail station on Smith Parkway, just off of Otis Street. We talked about safety for pedestrians in the area, and we did an inventory of our infrastructure for existing conditions. After we completed the baseline survey, we had our first abutters meeting, our stakeholders meeting in May 10th of 21, from which we included that input and we made some future projections. And during the future projections, we did a full build-out analysis of the Otis Street corridor. We included Otis Street, Smithville Parkway, Secaucus Drive, and Valenti Drive up on Boston Hill, because in the future it might be possible to have a connection between Smith Parkway and Valenti Drive on Boston Hill. That's a possibility. From there, we developed concept plans. The plan was presented then to both the Planning Board and the Select Board for their input. Cost estimates were then worked on to project what the cost of the improvements might be. Improvements were prioritized, and again, we received departmental input from the town staff. Then we came up with the final plan back in September. The final plan then was reviewed by both the Select Board and the Planning Board, and town staff input was given to that, and it was finalized at the end of the year in December. The road safety audit, as you'll see, was also included in the final report. Mass DOT has been involved all along the way. I want you to keep in mind what the goal of the plan is here. This is an integrated plan that was considered in the town's master plan update, which was just completed in October of 2021. The overall study goal is to define a set of measurable initiatives, associated costs, and prioritization for improving traffic flow, safety, multimodal travel options along the Otis Street corridor that will guide investment to accommodate future growth. That's the most important thing, is we're thinking about what Otis Street will look like 10 and 20 years down the road, to be able to accommodate the demands of the employees that work in these new buildings, think about future investment in the value of the property, and ultimately grow the value of the property on Otis Street and in the west part of town overall. With that said, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Bob Michaud, Principal of MDM Transportation Consultants.
Thank you, Jim. What I'd like to do is really just give a very broad overview of certain elements of the quarter study that have led to ultimately the recommendations that Jim is alluding to. The limits of this, and this was defined during our first stakeholder meeting in May of this past year, really encompasses the intersection at Route 9, the signalized location, all the way down to the south at Fisher Street. And you can see a number of the existing commercial driveways that were considered during that evaluation. Of course, during that process, we're also aware of a number of different local initiatives by private entities to develop certain parcels along the corridor that became integral to the study. This study was not all about traffic. This study was very much multimodal perspective that considered existing alternative transportation facilities, public transportation in particular. The MBTA commuter rail station, as Jim mentioned, is very close to this corridor. Fantastic amenity, provide access beyond just vehicles. And as well, the Worcester Regional Transit Authority currently has service along the corridor, as well as the Fisher Street corridor that are integrated into the study. Beyond that, we have inventoried and identified a series of infrastructure gaps, if you will, sidewalks in particular, pedestrian crossings, areas that need to be linked and enhanced to provide the multimodal functions that are one of the objectives of the study. And you can see in this particular aerial diagram some of those missing links, both on the east side of Otis Street and the west side. Ultimately, the goal of the study is to try to connect properties, land uses, residents to various land use opportunities. So, for instance, the Arrive apartment complex here, which is really bifurcated from the south side of Route 9 for lack of any pedestrian crossing, the inability for folks who may be inclined to walk or bike to the commuter rail station really can't do so very easily until those types of links are addressed. We're also well aware and have included some of the outcomes of the Boston-Worcester Airline Trail feasibility study that was conducted for the town. As that relates to the Otis Street corridor in particular, you can see outlined in green shaded area here, the limits of the corridor study do include components of what's known as the B-Walt Trail that would run along the west side of Otis Street. Would provide connectivity to the MBTA station, would provide crossing of the Route 9 corridor to the Northborough line, and would continue easterly to the Main Street and eventually Lyman Street corridors. So we've incorporated those multimodal aspects within the context of recommendations for the corridor. From a safety perspective, Jim had mentioned the road safety audit. This is an aerial diagram that indicates some of the crash trends that currently exist within the Route 9 signalized intersection. There are many of them. It is a high crash location. So the study endeavors to try to implement and address certain recommendations that have already been identified in that prior road safety audit. As we look at the needs of the corridor, we view those needs from the perspective of a stool, if you will, 3 legs of a stool. The first leg being safety-related improvements, again, implementation of certain recommendations of the road safety audit that include everything from signs, markings, and geometric enhancements to that intersection, as well as how to better manage how the signal operates by split phasing its operation and therefore reducing conflicts within the intersection. And of course, introducing new pedestrian crossings and features to make both pedestrian and bicycle accommodation a real feature of that intersection. The second leg of that stool relates to the multimodal connections that are so important in these times. The B-Walt I mentioned earlier on the west side of Otis Street, as well as its potential crossings of the Otis Street corridor, providing sidewalk continuity, particularly on the east side of Otis Street, where there are substantial missing gaps, and identifying and developing prominent path and pedestrian crossings at specific locations along the corridor. The third leg has to do with operational enhancements. or capacity. It's no surprise today that during certain periods of the day, there's a lot of friction, a lot of queuing, and a lot of delay that's occurring. And so the fix to that is additional lane capacity, particularly in the upper end or the northerly end of Otis Street where it meets Route 9. The provision of consolidated driveway access along the corridor so that we not only reduce the number of conflict points that currently exist, particularly in the northerly section, but also open up opportunity for future signal control at those consolidated locations. And we'll walk through each of those major elements. What I'd like to do is introduce the outcome of the study, at least from the perspective of certain portions of that three-legged stool, right? Safety, multimodal connections, and capacity. We'll start with the upper or northerly end at Route 9. You'll see, and this is very much in a color format here to simplify the discussion, one of the key features of this is the introduction of a shared use path or a portion of the B-Walt Trail. You can see that in a gold tone color here on the southerly or lower portion of the page. That's the west side of Otis Street. It would begin in the vicinity of the Arrive apartment complex, where there's an existing pedestrian crossing. We know that's a well-used crossing in that it provides the so-called desire line between a very high number of residents to various land uses like McDonald's, Walmart, as well as potentially to the RK Plaza across on the south side of Route 9. You'll see that there is some widening anticipated to accommodate the alignment of that path on that edge, as well as an additional restructured lane. The introduction of an enhanced pedestrian crossing of Route 9, and eventually connecting to the continuation of that path all the way to Fisher Street. As we look at other elements of the plan here, you'll see that there's a substantial widening for capacity reasons on this upper or northerly portion of the corridor, right? Today, if you want to go westbound on Route 9, you can do so in a single left turn lane. That introduces a long queue that is sometimes extending beyond the target driveway. This plan envisions opening up an additional lane, dual left turn lane capability. It also introduces an additional southerly lane headed toward the target, right, to better accommodate turns onto that southerly direction. And it better defines the queue extents that we anticipate will occur under a longer term growth scenario so that this operation, when the signal is fully improved and this geometry is in place, that the queues that often will extend beyond target today are actually contained well within the first couple of 100 feet of the Otis Street corridor. As we proceed southerly, we envision, and this has to do with the driveway consolidation recommendation of the corridor study, that the target driveway, to the extent feasible, would be shifted as far away from the Route 9 corridor as possible. That would, in this concept, shift it about between 80 and 100 feet further south, and what would allow the opportunity for a new signalized control that doesn't currently exist. That would be coordinated with the Route 9 corridor. That consolidated element provides an opportunity for the adjoining properties to actually have cross-connecting driveways so that they also can obtain the benefit of having direct access into or leaving their properties from that location. We think that that's an inherent benefit and will actually add value to those properties while also reducing those conflicts that we know currently exist, particularly in the area of 74 to 76 Otis Street here. As we proceed further down the corridor, that 4-lane cross-section eventually begins to taper down to the existing 2-lane section along the corridor, but before that point, there's been a couple of recent developments, 60 to 64 Otis Street, for instance. That'll be an Amazon sub-last mile facility. is in the process of constructing a driveway on the west side. The 66 property as well, the brew pub, recently approved, will also have its own driveway here. And the RK Plaza driveway, which currently exists in this orientation, ideally would be relocated, if feasible, to align with that new driveway at 60 to 64. That consolidated location would provide yet another potential signalized location, consolidated access to better accommodate the needs of not only the 60 to 64 properties and RK Plaza, but any future development that might be able to connect to the signal through cross-connecting driveways. Proceeding, you can see the continued path alignment of the B-Walt on this edge, but you can also now see in gold on the upper portion of the page, or the east side of Otis Street, the introduction of a new sidewalk connection. We heard through the abutter input back in May of last year, desire to better connect the properties on the east side of Otis Street for pedestrian accommodation. Certain users there, certain tenants actually have multiple buildings that they need to have access to for their employees, and rather than getting into a car to get from one campus building to another, the introduction of a new sidewalk system along that edge allows for a walking connection, which we think is very valuable. Proceeding toward Fisher Street, you'll see that the B-Walt study has introduced the idea of side path connections. This is the approximate alignment on the east side of Otis Street of a future bike path extension by the town as part of the B-Walt study, as well as on the west side here, path connection that would eventually lead to the MBTA station. So what this plan envisions is an enhanced pedestrian crossing that aligns with that future bike path or B-Walt connection. And finally, as we approach the Smith Valve Parkway signalized intersection, there are enhancements to the pedestrian crossings that are identified, as well as lane capacity to allow better access to those easterly properties at the signal. And this eventually tapers back down to the existing alignment of Fisher Street. The entire corridor will be striped beyond the Smith Valve Parkway for bicycle accommodation features as well. All right, so that's a large overview of the plan elements. One of the questions we have anticipated is, how does this relate to specific land uses along the corridor? And in that regard, we've developed some plans at a very conceptual level that would identify specific easement areas that are required to implement this plan, beginning at the Route 9 side at Arrive apartment complex, to introduce a new right turn lane, which is going to vastly improve the operations and capacity on the Route 9 corridor. That lane would require an easement along the northerly edge of the property. It's a relatively small easement. It's less than 4,000 square feet. It in no way impacts the existing parking or circulation aspects of that property, but is something that is a requirement to implement the improvements. And as we proceed down the corridor, we'll see another easement on the McDonald side for purposes of constructing the shared use path connection. And then proceeding further to the south on the Mose Plaza side, 74 to 76, you'll see, for the very same reasons, the shared use path, as well as the additional lane widening of Otis Street, would require additional easements along the property frontages in that area. And I'll stress, none of which impact existing parking, none of which impact site circulation aspects or how those businesses operate. And you'll see as we work our way down, is shown in green again, for various properties, limited easements are required as we work toward Fisher Street along that west side, particularly for the shared use path alignment, right? And now we're going beyond the the Atlantic properties at 60. This is the 66 brew pub property. This is the 60 to 64 property. The easements would be required as well as the extend to the 50 Otis Street property. And then eventually at Smith Valve Parkway, whoops, I skipped a few. Hang on, sorry. Smith Valve Parkway, where the town actually owns that land, would require yet another easement. As we look at the easterly side, or the Herb Chambers side of the road, again, a series of easements would be required, none of which impact parking, none of which impact site circulation or property rights along that edge. This particular taking at the upper end of Otis Street really is for purposes of getting that extra left turn lane in there, and as we proceed down, principally for construction of sidewalk components. This is in front of the RK Plaza property, 55 property. This is where that new sidewalk extension would be provided. Continuing to 53, 49, 35, and eventually to Smith Parkway. So these are relatively minor easements, but they would be a necessary component of implementation as we move forward. With that, that's the technical aspect of the finding. I'd like to introduce Bob Buckley of Reamer Bronstein, and he's going to walk you through the implementation process and what that entails, both from the funding perspective as well as the landowner participation process.
Thank you, Bob. Before I begin, just so we're clear as to what the various roles are, I represent the applicant on Atlantic Management on a number of the projects here, and we agreed to fund and work with the town to fund the initial corridor study, which Bob presented. Bob was the consultant for the town, and work with the town. We retained certain other consultants, which I'll introduce as we go along, to help the town in this climate perhaps get some infrastructure money to implement some of the improvements that we've shown here. From a legal perspective, I think all the property owners would benefit tremendously by these improvements because it will enhance traffic flow, pedestrian safety, and entry and exit from their various properties. That was one of the goals in putting this together, and making a natural connection to the commuter rail station. So Atlantic, as part of their site plan approvals, will be constructing portions of this as they proceed with their development. We're going to, based upon the stakeholder meetings and the feedback we get, advance the plan set beyond the 25% design plan so that we can get to a point that we will be considered, hopefully, for state and federal funding to implement these. It's a unique opportunity to do a lot in a short period of time with great improvements. There are grant of easements that will be required. These are easements, they're not takings of fee. And the normal concerns of a property owner, what does this do to me in terms of my zoning compliance? The town has provisions in their bylaw that to the extent that an easement is taken for public purposes, it doesn't affect your compliance with zoning, so you'll not become non-compliant. And there are mechanisms in place that will ensure that you assume no liability from these public benefits. We will undertake the preparation of a lack of a better term, form easement that will be reviewed by the appropriate town council and state authorities to make sure that it's all compliant. And again, tying it back to what I said earlier, I think that the ultimate benefit of the grant of these easements to the various property owners is an enhancement to their value. But you'll all have an opportunity as these plans get more refined to look at the various potential impacts to your individual properties, and any questions we'll be glad to answer. One of the,
I'm sorry.
do you want?
I was going to control that for you, sorry.
One of the things that we did as this progressed, as part of our 64 site plan approval, we agreed to fund the retention of a consultant who is well-known in the Commonwealth and is very successful at interfacing between municipalities and the state and other sources of public monies, because this really is a true public-private partnership. And it's April Anderson right here, who's been working with us and the town to try to file the requisite applications and pull the application together so that we will be considered as a viable project. It's such a unique opportunity because we have a moment in time where there's perhaps a tremendous amount of infrastructure money, both at the federal and state level, and we have a project that we're trying to position to be ready to go. And a testament to your planning over the last 20 years, 15 years, you have a true rail transit district. You have a commuter rail station with housing and commercial development, emphasis on pedestrian. You have the ability to interface that with hiking and pedestrian access trails. If you're looking at this from a planning standpoint, it touches all the bases. So I think that helps us in the application process and puts this project, this proposal, at the front of the line. And that's why we have April, and she'll help us get there. I think that it will also spur future development along the corridor, which is one of the factors that I know the town asked Bob when he prepared this, and I know it was discussed in a stakeholder meeting last year, to look at the potential growth potential in connection with the preparation of the corridor study. So those things have been factored into the baseline as well as the projections out, that what we're doing now can not only handle and enhance what's there today, but is an impetus for future development and will be capable of handling that. And it really will be a maximum infusion of economic potential into the area. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I think perhaps back to Jim.
Oh, Jim, and at the end here, we do have, if you have questions both on the local level, you want to talk to us in terms of the legal issues and how we intend to proceed, this information is available. And I believe this is being recorded, so you can watch it again. So. Maybe I'll sit up here.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Bob. If anyone wants a copy of the presentation Bob mentioned earlier, both Bobs, Bob and Bob, mentioned that you will be able to see this online. You can see there's a link there for YouTube. You can also request through Fred Leonardo a copy of the JPEG of this presentation. So please make note of the email addresses. If you have any questions about easements or about funding sources, please contact Bob Buckley. And at this time, we would like to take questions or comments. Please raise your hand and let us know who you are. Oh, yes, Kristen. Thank you. Can you read that for us? Okay. Patrick, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Patrick.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Patrick Welch from the Select Board here. Yeah, I was just curious, looking at the corridor study, first of all, very supportive of the improvements that are being recommended here. What is or has there been any consideration in regards to extending or improving the sidewalk between Fisher Street and Smith Valley Parkway along Otis Street? I didn't see any description of that to enhance the modality for the Fisher Street community down to the MBTA station, as well as onward to the BWAT Trail and even into the into the shopping area to provide them access, similar to how access is being improved from the Arrive on the north side of Otis Street there.
So Patrick, just so that I understand your question, you're talking about getting from the Fisher Street neighborhood to Smith Parkway?
Correct.
Okay. You're aware there was an old railroad bridge that goes over the MBTA railroad, and that bridge is going to be reconstructed with a Mass DOT funding to replace the bridge for pedestrian and bicycle access only. That will bring you right down from the end of Fisher Street to Smith Parkway, adjacent to the MBTA station. Did that answer your question?
Sorry, I'm bringing myself off mute here again. Yeah, that's on the backside of the connection. What I'm referring to is also allowing better access for those on the east side of Fisher Street so that they don't have to go all the way through the west side Fisher Street neighborhood to get access to the MBTA. They can come right down Otis Street, get to Smith Valley Parkway, or directly to B-Walt instead of cutting through that neighborhood.
There is a sidewalk that exists there currently. So you can come from Otis Street, turn right onto you can come from Fisher Street, turn right on Otis Street, and cross over the railroad on sidewalk. It will need to be extended along the frontage of the property adjacent to 9 Otis Street. So I think that's 11 Otis Street to connect to the existing sidewalk. And then it would connect up to the new proposed sidewalk as part of this corridor plan. And that would give you the opportunity to either walk the length of Otis Street from Fisher or to cross at a signalized intersection with a pedestrian phase for safety to cross over to Smithville Parkway.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Okay, Mark, can you unmute yourself and we can hear you?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Mark Smith. I work for Coca-Cola. I represent Coca-Cola Beverages Northeast. Obviously, we have a facility in Westborough on Secaucus Drive. I believe there was a few mentionings of what might change. I looked at during the presentation, it looked like they're going to widen maybe the access to Otis Street. But then I heard in the beginning, was there some kind of conversation that said they might possibly want to continue that road to another section and have a through point, or is that just something you're talking about for future plans?
Are you talking
about?
about?
Can you just highlight what you're planning right now for Secaucus Street?
No plans for Secaucus Drive. Perhaps you were referring to the comment about Valenti Drive, which is up on Boston Hill.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else remote? Kristen? No? Thank you to both comments from the audience. Anyone here in the room? Ellen Google, I see. I don't know, can you hear her? Why don't you come to this microphone, Ellen? That way the folks who are online can hear you.
Hi, Ellen Google, 84 Fisher Street. So I have a question as a resident there of whether or not any consideration was made to improve the intersection of Otis and Fisher Street. And specifically, I'm concerned that there's going to be more traffic through that neighborhood where they use the cut through for Fisher Street. And one of the ideas I have floated and proposed along the way is a stop sign for Fisher Street coming out of town. Right now, it's a T. Right now, it's a T that has 2 stop signs. And I'm wondering if a 3rd stop sign has been considered so that while there will be more traffic coming through the neighborhood as a result of this, that at least it will be slowing down for a stop sign instead of blowing through that intersection. Right now, if I want to go across Otis Street, coming home from town, I have to look behind me to see if something's coming. They don't have a stop sign, and so I'm wondering if you've considered that.
Thank you for that question, Ellen. And I know that our local Transportation Safety Committee has been looking at that. That's something we'll continue to look at. That intersection is not part of this study, however, so there's not a recommendation in the corridor study. Thank you, Ellen. Any other questions in the room?
Jim, can I make a comment?
Please.
And I know you're aware of it, I know Bob is also, that there'll be additional stakeholder meetings as the plans progress and as things go along. So we'll be, I believe we have a database now with a lot of the names and email addresses of various stakeholders. So stay tuned. It's an iterative process, and as we work on some of the documentation, we'll get it out and people can consider it. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll see what we can do in terms of getting you a prompt answer.
That's a good comment, Bob. Thank you. I know that in these meeting formats, sometimes in a large group or if you're participating from home, it's difficult to formulate your questions cold. These two email addresses that you see up on the screen, you can reach out to them. You can also go to the town website where you can find my email address, Jim Robbins, in the planning board. You're always welcome to ask any questions that you think of after this meeting or after you review the presentation, either the recording or the document that you can find on our town website. Yes, another question.
Steve Migrodician, DNS Realty. We own a couple properties at 49 and 53 Otis. I'm just wondering, in light of the additional buildings and structures, if there's been any evaluation or input regarding fire suppression, additional fire hydrants, water pressure, et cetera, regarding fire safety. Thank you.
I don't see anyone here from the fire department today. The fire department did take a look at this plan. I'm going to ask Bob if you had any communication with them on that.
No, we, throughout the study process, we did engage with the departments, the various departments, including fire department. We did not get to a level of discussion that would relate to individual building needs, per se. We anticipated that through local review process, perhaps, that those types of issues would be fleshed out for specific land uses along the corridor. I will say that as we're advancing what's called the 25% design, and it's an advanced version of what I've just presented, that would form the basis of the grant request. That during that process, we're certainly open to continuing conversations with fire department and various town departments. So to the extent landowners have a specific concern that relates to fire suppression, water pressure, et cetera, I would suggest that you reach out directly to the town and make those issues known so that as we're continuing to engage during the design process, that we'll become aware of that through that outreach.
And as the projects on the other side, on the westerly side, have been developed, there were testing of capacity and pressure as part of the process there, and that was deemed adequate. But Bob's correct, as it goes forward, it will be reviewed. Jimmy,
I'm sorry. Yes, hi, Don Byrne.
Don Vern, Flanders Road. I just was wondering if there's going to be any meetings targeted towards the residents, and like when you hit the 25% design, you're pretty well locked in things. And for instance, the Active Transportation and Safety Committee I know has questions. When I made when I've been talking to people, a lot of people come up to me since I'm the one who architected B-Wald, and they talk about, well, I mentioned that there's efforts going on along Otis Street. They go, what efforts? They've never heard of anything. So there's a communication issue here. Even conservation said, oh, you have some plans? Could you send them to me? So send them to us. So I have concerns that there are things that are being overlooked because of the process, which is fine so far, but we need to expand the venue a little.
Yeah, perhaps the Active Transportation Safety Committee could host a meeting where this is presented.
Yeah. On behalf of the applicant, not speaking on behalf of the town, but I know that during the public hearing process for the projects that have been developed, we've been nothing but transparent, trying to put and I believe you were at some of the meetings, we've put the plans out there from day one as part of the intent of the corridor study to look at these issues. So I just want the record to reflect that we've been trying to do our best to make sure that everyone who has an interest is advised as what's going forward.
I mean, this isn't the appropriate meeting to go into details, obviously, but I will point out that the plan that showed B-Wald was from the 2019 feasibility study and has nothing to do with the current plans for B-Wald. And that the routes that were shown on the detailed plans are all incorrect.
We'll make sure we get the correct data, Don. Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone watching online with a question? No. Thank you. We'll be here in the room if you want to come up and talk to us individually. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, motion to close the meeting?
I don't have anyone from the planning board in attendance, but I see we have a couple selectmen that might want to close the meeting.
Patrick, you're remote on hybrid. I moved to adjourn. Sean seconded. Any discussion?
None here.
Okay,
None here,
call
this is
vote.
Shelby.
Oh, Shelby as well, thank you. Roll call vote, Shelby?
Marshall, yes.
Patrick?
Welch, yes.
Sean? Keo, yes. Keo, yes, and Edinburgh, yes. Select board's adjourned, 4-0, 4 being present. Thank you.
Thank you.